Subscribe to The Honest Critique for current affairs, movie, book, and product reviews. Also, make sure you press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the video series are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily represent those of The Honest Critique and its employees. The following video contains strong language which may be offensive to some viewers. Viewer discretion advised.
So hello and welcome to another episode of Security, Intelligence and Terrorism series. Today we have Lieutenant General Deependra Singh Hooda with us, who was commissioned into the 4th Battalion of the 4th Gorkha Rifles on December 15, 1976. General Hooda performed his initial service in Nagaland during the height of the Naga insurgency and thereafter as instructor at Military College of Telecommunication Engineering. From 2012 to 16, he was stationed in Jammu and Kashmir, and a larger part of the interview will be based on that when he was a corps commander and then as the Army Commander of the Northern Command. In his recognition for his exemplary military service, Sir has been awarded with the Vishisht Seva Medal twice, Ati Vishisht Seva Medal, the Uttam Yudh Seva Medal, and the Param Vishisht Seva Medal. Thank you so much, sir, for taking your time and being on the show. It's an honor and a privilege to host you, and thank you so much for your service.
My pleasure. It's good to be here with both of you.
So before we begin, sir, thank you so much for your service. Could we start with getting to know a bit about your background and what propelled you into joining the Indian Army?
So, Ananya, I was 16 years old exactly when I joined the National Defense Academy. And at that time, it just sort of, seemed the natural thing to do. My grandfather was in the army. He had served in the First World War. My father was in the army. He had served in the Second World War, and obviously after that, post-independence. Before me, my elder brother had joined the army. So, we had actually lived through this whole military culture. And I think I personally found value in the culture and the ethos that we were living in. So frankly, there was a simplicity of purpose. I am not going to say I was driven by some higher motivation of serving a noble purpose, etc., etc. As I said, coming from a military family, it just sort of felt the right thing to do. And that you were joining a profession that was good and noble.
Yeah. So I will start with the formal first question. So can you tell us about the formative years of the Indian Army? Since you mentioned that your father and your grandfather both worked during the World War I, World War II, and we inherited this Indian Army from the British. So can you talk about the organization structure and the role of the Indian Army in probably World War II, which is probably not very recognized as of now. It's very recent that we have started to read more about it.
That is true because at that time, obviously, India was not independent. And the army was known as the British Indian Army. In fact, a lot of people, who are not aware of the details, call it the British Army. And, I did my staff college in Canada and I had to correct a lot of people there to say, look, it wasn't the British Army. It was the Indian Army. So in World War II, the Indian Army was actually the largest volunteer army in the world at about, 2.5 million men. I know there were other armies which are larger in size, but those were conscript armies where everybody had to, beyond a certain age, had to serve in the national armies. In India's case, the Indian Army was a pure volunteer army. And, it fought in 3 continents. It fought in Asia, it fought in Africa, it fought in Europe. Of course, the bulk of the Indian Army at that time fought the Japanese. And, the defeat of the Japanese forces was largely due to the efforts of the Indian Army. So, as you said, not too many people know, but the Indian Army has made an enormous contribution towards winning the Second World War. Post independence, actually, it was a time of great churning for the Indian Army. I told you the Indian Army was 2.5 million, that is 25 lakhs strong. And immediately after Second World War ended, it came down from 25 lakhs to 3 lakhs. So 22 lakh soldiers were demobilized. So, as I said, there was a great deal of churning. Immediately after independence, within 2 months, the Indian Army was engaged, in an all-out war with Pakistan, the first war on Jammu and Kashmir in 1947-48, a war which lasted almost, actually, a little more than 1 year. So immediately after independence, also, I think right from that time, it has been really, really challenging times for the Indian Army. But I think the experience of World War II, the fact that it was an army that had fought the Japanese in jungles, in mountains. I think that experience also stood us in very good stead when we fought the first 1947-48 war with Pakistan.
Yeah. So, sir, coming back to post-independence, both India and Pakistan got independence around the same time, but both countries had a very different experience with the army. Pakistan has seen a spate of military rulers and three successful military coups, whereas India has seen an uninterrupted civilian rule being except the emergency in the 70s. So, what explains this difference between the Indian army and the Pakistan army?
So, as you rightly pointed out, the Indian and the Pakistan armies, although actually came out from the same British Indian Army. So the origins of both the armies are the same, but they have followed completely different trajectories. And I think there are 3, 4 reasons. So let me try and explain those. Firstly, the principle of political control is very much ingrained in the military ethos of the Indian Army. That the army has its particular purpose, but political control remains primary as far as civil military relations are concerned. I think it has to do with the fact that we had a very stable government immediately after independence. So we had a general election. Within about 2.5 years, we had come out with a constitution in 1950. And democracy was very firmly established in India. In Pakistan, right from the beginning, there has been a great deal of political instability. So there were no general elections held. I mean, there were only statewide elections held. The first elections that were held in Pakistan after independence, they were not able to, come up with a constitution for almost 9 years. In 1956 was their first constitution. And that constitution too, within 2 years, was abrogated because in 1958, the Pakistan, military took over power in a military coup. It also has to do with the kind of ideology, that was established in Pakistan, where hostility towards India, looking at India as an existential threat to Pakistan, became deeply sort of ingrained in their culture. And because this was deeply ingrained hostility, and that India doesn't want Pakistan to remain an independent country, the military took advantage of this fear and said, we are the only custodians who can actually protect Pakistan from India's hostility. And it is because of this idea, that evolved in Pakistan, that the Pakistan military even today has a great hold on, issues regarding security of the country, issues regarding, even diplomacy of the country. So it is this fear that has enabled Pakistan Army to, establish the kind of position that they have in the hierarchy in Pakistan. Let me also, say here, it is not as if the people of Pakistan don't like the army. It's one of the most respected institutions in their country. And that is because, as I said earlier, this deeply ingrained fear of India is going to do something to us. India doesn't want us to exist as an independent country. Those fears have, and of course, a great deal of political instability that is there in Pakistan. They have not been able to give uh, a stable governance. The reputation of the politicians is not very good. And so all these factors, I think, have led to army taking an inordinately large role in Pakistan's political affairs.
So a couple of follow-up questions on that. So basically, at that time, the Army Chief 1949, Field Marshal Cariappa, was a very complex character. In 1949, while he wrote a letter saying bluntly that politics in army is a poison, keep off it. But post his retirement, he did join politics, and he asked many times for disbanding political parties, suspension of parliament until law and order has been restored, and suspension of civil liberties. So, for a lot of viewers, can you break down this complexity in the character of Field Marshal? And the second point is, how much control should the civilian government have on the army?
See, as far as the army and the army's senior leadership at that time, and as you mentioned, Field Marshal Cariappa, I mean, was a rarity. So it isn't as if many senior military officers at that stage, necessarily agreed with his views. And obviously, even for us in the military, a democracy was something new. I think it was new to everybody. All the people we had come out of many years of subjugation, under the British rule. So it was something that was new. But I don't think the ideas of the field marshal are reflected in the general thinking in the military at that time. The general thinking at that time and even today is that in a democracy, political control is absolutely essential as far as the military is concerned, and we completely respect that. I think where the danger is, and I think while we understand that in the military, the politicians must also understand that bringing the military in political arguments, using the military to win political arguments is also not right. Because if the military gets politicized, then the first impact is on professionalism of the force. So the professionalism will get diluted. So I think it's also a national security requirement that the military leaders understand their position in a democracy, and political leaders understand that keep the military out of politics. I think so. From both sides, if people work together, it's the best case situation.
Sir, the next question that I have is a two-part question. So we saw that the British mostly, or if not mostly, they recruited a lot from the martial races. And even after independence, even though we saw a democratization of the entire process, there are still regiments that are based on these martial races. So what's your take on that issue? And does social, cultural, and linguistic homogeneity act as a force multiplier in the battlefield?
So yes, you're right. The British recruited a lot of the Indian army, on the concept of martial races. That has changed to a very large extent today. So today, a majority of the recruitment that takes place in the Indian Army is on the basis of all India, all class basis. There is only in the infantry, which is what we call our main fighting force, which could be about 1/3 to 1/4 of the Indian Army, not more than that. Where there is some recruitment that takes place, on caste or region basis, or as you're saying, on martial races basis. So in the infantry, you have regiments like the Gorkhas, the Madras, the Mahar, the Assam, the Bihar, which was a new phenomenon, which wasn't considered martial race as far as the British are concerned. So you have the Sikh and the Punjab regiments. I think what you have mentioned, about social and cultural and linguistic homogeneity, I think what we have found in our own experience is that it helps in combat. When you have soldiers, belonging to the same sort of cultural group, many of them coming from the same village, from the same region, it helps, in bonding them together when combat actually takes place. There is also a very long history behind some of these regiments. So some going back to, more than 300 years ago. And it's this military history, it's this tradition that also becomes a very big motivating factor, when you're going into war. So our experience has been that yes, while we've opened up the rest of the military and the rest of the army for open recruitment, uh, we feel that in some of the infantry regiment, the system that is being followed is useful. And therefore, it's my personal viewpoint also that it should be continued. We must remember, let's not tinker with successful models. So, as they say, if something is not broken, why do you want to try and fix it? So I think it's standing us in good stead, the regimental system and the infantry, and I think we can continue with it.
So a small follow-up on that, and regarding to a question that I've asked before on Pakistan. So one of the things that British practiced was the divide and rule, and one of those things we have seen was it used to let the minorities uh, rule the majorities by probably putting them in the army. And a lot of people from the that time the army was from Punjab dominated region. And do you think one of the reasons why the army actually got more power in Pakistan was because majority part of the province of Punjab went to them and majority people were from Punjab?
That is true. So it is still today, Punjabi dominated. Not only the army, of course, is Punjabi dominated, but also I think the country as a whole is Punjabi dominated. So if you look at the others, the Pashtuns, the Baluch, the Sindhis, etc., and see the position of the Punjabis in Pakistan, then the domination is by the Punjabis. But it's also because it's the most affluent and probably the largest sort of region in Pakistan. Uh, that model, frankly, is not applicable to a country like India, which is just too diverse and too large, where you can say that a specific community will be able to sort of dominate the political landscape in the country. I don't think that will happen in India.
I had a follow-up on lines of the last question itself. Although you answered the entirety of the question, I still have a doubt regarding the entire identity that is associated with the martial races and therefore the regiment's name after it. Is there a certain sense of identity that gets associated to anyone who's recruited to a certain regiment as such?
So, as I said earlier, let's just remember it's only in the infantry, which I said is maybe about a quarter of the Indian Army. So let's not also get the impression that a majority of the Indian Army is based on this concept of martial races, etc. So yes, there are some regiments. As I said, there is a sense of belonging. And what happens in combat is people fight not so much at that immediate moment when you're facing bullets. You're fighting for the name of your unit. You're fighting for your comrade who's next to you. And so sometimes, this cultural sort of homogeneity gives you a certain additional kind of bonding. As I said, the martial race concept of what was followed during the British time has also got diluted in the infantry to a large extent. For example, towards the end of the Second World War, you had new regiments coming up. I gave you the example of Assam Regiment, the Bihar Regiment, the Mahar Regiment. So recruitment even in the infantry was opened up to many other classes which were traditionally not considered martial races. But even in those regiments, whether they are martial or non-martial, the fact is, if people bond together well, there is cultural and social homogeneity. Uh, it makes for good sense. I'm myself from Gorkha, which was considered a martial race. Uh, what we do almost every year is that young officers travel to traditional recruiting areas in Nepal. They go, they stay in the villages, they get to meet the people, they get to understand, the social background from which soldiers come. That also makes us sort of better leaders in trying to understand the people. So, as I said, it's a model that has served us in good stead, and I think let's continue with that.
Yeah. So the next question is, the Indian Army has been able to cope up with the extremes of condition and operate in different terrains. And if I can give one simple example, you associate it with the Naga insurgency, and it was jungle warfare. And then around the same time, we had Operation Blue Star, when the army was operating in a very different terrain. And then we had a foreign mission as well to Sri Lanka, and also around the same in the after post during that time we also see, for example, the formation of Rashtriya Rifles, which started as a counter insurgency terrorism forces, now is operating in the hinterland. So if you can tell us a little bit about how is the army able to cope up with such situations, how has the army been successful coping up with such situation, and it has been able to succeed as well. So what has favored in for the Indian Army?
Okay, so I'll point out three things. The first is, the organizational ethos that is very, very deeply ingrained in every soldier. Uh, that is taught to every soldier, and this organizational ethos promotes values like self-sacrifice, courage, honor, duty, etc. Now, for us, these are not sort of empty words. I mean, these are absolutely essential to our functioning. If we don't follow these values, I can tell you, the military will not be able to, or the army will not be able to operate in the conditions that you've just sort of listed out in different areas. So, the first thing I would say is a very strong organizational ethos and very strong military values. Uh, the second thing is, professionalism. There is a great deal of emphasis on focusing on what is your primary task, which is, to fight a war for India, to secure India's borders. Our whole training, our whole teaching process, what we call professional military education, is geared towards promoting professionalism. And that is why, as I said earlier, the Indian Army is just chosen to stay away completely from politics, because any politicization dilutes professionalism. And the third thing is the standard of leadership, and in particular, the standard of our junior leadership. I mean, our junior officers are outstanding. The kind of conditions in which they are functioning, in which they are operating, their bonding with the soldiers, I think is as good as anywhere in the world. So the three things that actually, as you say, help the army go through the most difficult of times is the organizational ethos, its professionalism, and its standard of junior leadership.
Post acquisition of nuclear arms, how did the roles and responsibilities of the Indian Army change? And especially after the draft that came in deciding and dictating how it would be commanded.
Okay, see, I think we have to understand what the role of nuclear weapons is. So the acquisition of nuclear weapons by India was a result of the reality that we have two hostile neighbors, China and Pakistan, both of which are nuclear armed. And therefore, India must resist what could be termed as nuclear blackmail. That you cannot do this because we possess nuclear weapons, and therefore we are able to sort of strategically blackmail you into certain conditions. Uh, so the nuclear weapons are primarily, as we say, for deterrence and not actually for war fighting. I mean, I don't think any sensible country in the world wants to say that we are going to use these nuclear weapons and we will vaporize each other's countries by the use of nuclear missiles or nuclear bombs. So primarily it is for deterrence, that don't try and threaten us, don't blackmail us by saying that we have nuclear weapons and you don't have. So the understanding in the Army, Navy, and Air Force is that the conventional forces still have a role to play, despite the fact that there is what you call the nuclear overhang. There is this talk of nuclear weapons being held with the three sides, but that does not mean that conventional wars are not going to be fought at all. And therefore, there is a need to have a standing conventional military. There is a need to train for war fighting. Pakistan has always been making this argument that just because we have nuclear weapons now, the Indian Army cannot do anything as far as we are concerned. But just remember, despite that, we've had the Kargil War, which was after both countries had declared that they have nuclear weapons. We've we've launched strikes across into Pakistan territory, both land strikes, and we've also launched aerial strikes. So as we say, there is space between the nuclear threshold for some limited conventional war fighting to take place.
In this role, and with regards to how cautiously, as you mentioned, we've been exercising it, and even after having a war, we've not exercised it as such. How does the Cabinet Committee on Security play out in these situations? That was mentioned in the draft.
So the Cabinet Committee on Security is the final authority, not only in terms of nuclear, but also to take final decisions as far as military operations, etc., are concerned. So as they say, the nuclear button, the nuclear trigger is in the hands of the Prime Minister. I mean, it's as I said, it's not a war fighting weapon that military generals will now start deciding on nuclear weapon use. So there is a very specific command and control structure of nuclear forces where just like in other democratic countries, the role and the employment of nuclear weapons is firmly in the hands of the highest political authority.
So another follow-up question on the same. Would that be a major difference in how, another major difference in how the Indian Army and the Pakistani Army function, that entire control does not lie with the Army as such?
Yeah, so as I said, the control lies in the hands of the highest sort of authority in the country. Now, who's the highest authority in Pakistan? So is it the Prime Minister or is it the Chief of the Army Staff? I think, see, technically on paper, they would also say the same thing, that the control lies in the hands of the Prime Minister. But whom will the Prime Minister listen to? I mean, so how much authority has the Pakistan Army Chief got in deciding as to how it is to be applied? So yes, the conditions in India and Pakistan are completely different.
So, as we know that India won all the war except the 1962 war. So this is one question that I think a lot of people from the army get. So what didn't work in India's favor at that time, and what challenges does India still face at the moment from China in the northern borders?
So see, let's honestly admit that the 1962 war was a case of complete failure at the strategic level. So I think there wasn't any clear understanding of how the decisions that are being taken could lead the country into a war. We had policies being given out about have a forward policy, have a forward posture. The decision which started the war, which was throw out the Chinese from the Thagla Ridge, was an order which was given by the Joint Secretary in the in the government of India. So I think, sorry. So I think one is that there wasn't a clear understanding of, the steps that we are taking could lead us to a war. Civil-military relations were extremely poor. I mean, there was hardly any sort of joint discussions or joint planning between the political leadership and the military leadership as to what should be our strategic paths that we should follow. And finally, and again, I have no hesitation in admitting this, that there was a failure of our senior military leadership in some of the decisions that they took, the hasty withdrawals, particularly from Arunachal Pradesh, uh, was something that, smells of a sense of panic among the senior military political leadership. So I think it was a combination of all these things that really uh, can be described as the darkest chapter in the history of the Indian military post independence. Today, the challenge from China remains our primary military threat. And it's rooted not only in history of 1962 war, etc., etc. I think it's rooted in geopolitics. We must understand that China today wants to be the dominant power in Asia, and it wants all the other countries to accept its dominant status. And what it sees is that India is possibly the only country in Asia that can stand up to China, that can prove to be a challenge to China's desire of hegemony in Asia. And so you're going to have strategic rivalry with China, not because of a 1962 war that we thought, but in the future, as China looks to cement its position on the global stage, it's going to see India as something that is standing in its path. And where will this sort of strategic rivalry manifest? It is going to manifest most probably along our northern borders, because those are borders which have not been agreed to by the two sides. There are disputes, there are differing perceptions. So that's an area where you will see China applying or attempting to apply pressure, just as we are seeing, what has happened in the last 1 year in Ladakh, that an attempt to apply pressure on India. So I think we should understand that China remains our primary military challenge as we look ahead, maybe over the next 2 to 3 decades. And so that's a reality that we have to live with. But having said that, it is also a reality that the Indian Army is not the army of 1962. And we've seen that in how they've reacted, where the recent intrusions in Ladakh are concerned. So it has good capability. Yeah, it needs to get better, just as I think all institutions need to get better. But it can hold its own. It can stand up to any kind of military pressure from China.
Yeah. So a couple of questions on your tenure at Northern Commander. So firstly, sir, this is one question that I had. Like, when do you actually analyze and decide whether you want to involve, the Jammu Kashmir Light Infantry, whether you want to involve the Rashtriya Rifles or the paramilitary forces? How does this decision comes to the picture? Suppose there's a, a threat that needs to be neutralized. So how do you go about this? Of which forces to
So,
involve?
so I think there is a fairly clear cut kind of division as far as roles of the paramilitary forces are concerned and the army is concerned. So there is a clear division of sort of responsibilities as to what they will do. For example, the CRPF in Jammu and Kashmir is working under control of the civil police. And so even when there are joint operations, they do police type functions. For example, they will control the crowds. They will make sure, if arrests are to be carried out, that is what they will do. While the actual counter-terrorist operations are carried out, by the army or by the Rashtriya Rifles. The Border Security Force, for example, which is deployed in Jammu and Kashmir on the line of control, is under operational control of the Indian Army. So it works on directions of the Indian Army. So I think there is no real dichotomy between what the BSF, CRPF, etc. is to do and what the army is to do. As far as the army is concerned, there is no distinction between Rashtra Rifles and Jammu and Kashmir Light Infantry or a Assam regiment or anything. So whichever unit is there and is in a position to carry out the operation best, it is that unit which carries out that operation. I want to make it clear. I don't know why you use Jammu and Kashmir Light Infantry. Jammu and Kashmir Light Infantry operates in Jammu and Kashmir, and it operates with equal professionalism as any other unit of the Indian Army. So let's not, even sort of inadvertently raise any sort of question marks on that.
Yeah. So my point was just to
Okay.
understand
No, I'm just saying, since you mentioned it.
Yeah. So another question is about the Special Forces commandos which carried out the cross-border operation in September 26 after the Uri terror attack, the famous surgical strike that the media has put in, and a lot of motion pictures have been made on that as well. So tell us about the surgical strike from planning to the execution stage. A lot of attacks have been happening, whether it's the Uri, the Pathankot that time, and you were the northern commander that time. So why is this considered as one of the biggest cross-border anti-terrorism operation?
Well, you want me to squeeze 10 days into 5 minutes? Okay, so let me try and be.
You can go. This is something that I think a lot of people will be interested in listening. By the way.
Okay, so we had, as you said, we had that attack on Uri garrison, very tragic, on 18th, where we lost 19 soldiers. One of the biggest sort of setbacks that we've had in Jammu and Kashmir, and certainly possibly the biggest setback in my own tenure as Army Commander, Northern Command. I mean, I have no hesitation in admitting it. But I think it was very quickly decided, among us in the military, also the political leadership, that we had to respond very strongly to this operation, and we couldn't respond merely by doing operations on our own side, but that we had to go and hit terror camps which are across the line of control in Pakistan held territory. Uh, some planning for this had been going on for more than a year, frankly. I mean, it isn't as if within 10 days you're able to just put together such a complex operation without any initial planning having been done. So we had been gathering intelligence about terrorist camps which are across. We had been looking at their layouts. We had been broadly making plans that in case this needs to be done, then how will we do it? So what we did over the next sort of 10 days was to finalize the targets and finalize the plan. So we had maybe multiple 10, 15 targets, out of which we said, okay, we'll select these 5. And then with those 5, the next 10 days were devoted to very detailed planning, selection of men, how many men will go for each target, what are the routes that you will follow, what is the time that each target is to be hit. Final sort of planning. We actually had to send small teams of people across the border to actually go and eyeball these camps and look at them, see what the latest information is there. And so we, as I said, we selected 5 targets. It was a very complex operation, not only because there were multiple targets, but all had to be hit on the same night. We were crossing what is considered the most heavily guarded border in the world. The India-Pakistan line of control is extremely, extremely heavily guarded on both sides. So you have Pakistani posts possibly every 200 meters. And all these terrorist camps were behind the line of Pakistani forward defenses. I mean, they were not there. So you had to go inside, cross the Pakistani posts, hit the targets, and obviously once you hit the targets and the firing starts, we were conscious that Pakistani soldiers would then be alerted. So the bigger challenge was not people going inside, because that could be done quietly. The bigger challenge was getting people back. When you find that all the forward line of Pakistani soldiers are now being alerted that something is happening behind us. One of our other big challenges and what we were conscious about is uh, you could have casualties, you could have people who are injured, you could have people who are dead. I mean, you're going into hostile territory, you are attacking terrorist camps, there's going to be an exchange of fire. So it isn't as if everybody would come back safely. There was a contingency that what would happen if there are some casualties. And to us, that was the biggest challenge, because the orders were very clear that nobody is to be left behind. So either you come back on your own 2 feet, and if you're unable to come back on your own 2 feet, then somebody will carry you back across the, on his shoulder. But not a single person could be left behind in Pakistan territory. And so we had also plans that in case some group or some team gets somehow caught up and is not able to come back on its own, then contingencies to how you would go and sort of rescue them and get them out. So it was a tense night for me, honestly. The night that we had these groups all across, and news started coming in that we've hit the first target, the second target is hit, third target is hit, the fourth and fifth target were hit almost when it was daytime, and so the return was all by day, and so they had to come back. But I think if uh, well, everyone came back safe, and I think that to me was the biggest success in some ways. More than the fact that you're in the Pakistani terror camps, that everybody was back safely. And if you have to ask me, whom does the credit go to? It goes to these more than 100 soldiers and officers who were across the border that night, who put their lives on the line. I think it was their courage, their meticulous planning, the manner in which they executed the operation, that, today some of us are taking sort of credit and celebrating the surgical strike. But the real credit honestly goes to these soldiers and men. So hats off to them. So that in a nutshell is what it is. Maybe some other time we can have a larger discussion on this.
Yeah. So I'll just ask a small follow-up on that. As the Northern Commander during that time and when the conversation was happening, and in fact the Prime Minister also made sure that there shouldn't be any casualties. Uh, was that a little pressure from your side? Did you expect that the entire mission could have been carried out without any casualties, especially when you're going to the other side and carrying out an attack?
No, no. As I said in our planning, I mean, it would be, I would say, unprofessional uh, to not cater for casualties. It would be wrong on our part as professional officers to say that you're going to go across, you're going to attack targets. Uh, you're going to cross enemy lines and come back. That there will be no casualties. I mean, that was the farthest thing. The fact that it happened was very good, but our planning obviously had to take into consideration that people could be injured, that you could have some deaths, and therefore the planning to get them back was also done in fair amount of detail.
Yeah, I know this is a very kind of like a political question, but uh, to go public with the strike, was that a good thing? Because a lot of times the army had done the strikes, but not went public with this. And did it help in this counterterrorism policies by any chance post that?
You see, each situation is different. Yes, you're right. We've done operations similar to this, although not on such a large scale in the past, and that those have not been talked about or those have not been publicized. I think each situation is different. Uh, you know, uh, Look at yourself at that time when you heard news about the fact that Uri has happened and we've lost 19 soldiers. A lot of questions were being asked as to what is the army doing, and that if you're not able to protect your own garrisons, I mean, are you going to be able to protect the country, etc., etc. I mean, some of those questions were being asked. Even within the army, people were saying, what are we going to do to, I don't use the word, but I mean, to avenge the death of so many soldiers? Are we just going to keep quiet? Are we going to do nothing? So I think at that time, the decision to announce that we have done it was, in my view, required, not only for the general public at large, uh, but also, within the army, I saw a great deal of raising of morale, and people were very, very excited and very happy the fact that it has been done, and the fact that we've gone across and we've hit them. So every situation, as I said, is different. Uh, After that, also, some operations have taken place which have not been publicized. So I think in this case, because the scale of the attack on Uri was so large, that I think it needed to be publicly told that we have responded in a much larger way to this.
First of all, sir, it's very humble of you to give the credit to all the soldiers as well. I've not seen that happen every time, so I really want to like commend you on that. That's a really unique thing that I've seen. Um, about my next question was, could you tell us a bit about the arms acquisition process and how does it work?
Okay, so how the arms acquisition works is that the first thing that is done is the identification of the need, which is what sort of weapon system you require, what numbers do you require. So having decided that okay, maybe we need an artillery gun because our current guns are old, or we need an aircraft because the aircraft are old. So the first thing that happens is that you identify what should be the characteristics of that weapon. So yes, you need a gun, but what kind of gun is it, and what caliber, what rate of fire. I don't want to go into too many technical details. But so what should be the characteristics of that weapon system? And thereafter, we float tenders that this is the gun, this is the type of gun that is required, and then you float a tender. In some cases, if that system is available locally, then it's an Indian tender. If it is not available in India, then it's a global tender. So, for example, the Rafale was a global tender, and so companies from all over the world respond to that, and they say, this is our system, and would you consider buying it? Once those details come in, thereafter there is a very extensive system of trials. So if you have like 3 systems, you will put them through extensive trials to see whether they meet our requirements. So for example, you will have what is called desert trials in 50 degrees, and then you will have high altitude trials which takes place in Siachen at minus 50 degrees, because you want a system that can work in all areas. So after the trial, then you do a selection process, and then is the cost negotiation, as they say, as to how much it should cost. And once all that is finalized, then you place the final order. So the system is, I would say, fairly good, fairly transparent. I think where I would have some criticism of the system is the time that it takes, because often it takes sometimes a decade to introduce a new weapon system. And today, the way technology is growing, often it could happen that you get a system which is already sort of technologically outdated. And so if we can speed up the acquisition process, I think that is one thing that we can do. So I think efforts are being made. We are having various defense acquisition policies come out year after year. But I don't think we have fixed everything. So there's still some areas that need to be sorted out.
So I have one small follow-up regarding that, uh, about the recent tender that was issued for the Kalashnikov acquisition of AK 203. Uh, and replacing with AK-47. So we have seen with the previous INSAS rifle, what has happened was a lot of problems came up, and since this tender has been floated and India is manufacturing this, do you see a certain problem with that again because of the previous experience with INSAS rifle,
No, no. So frankly, the
especially since it's in a
INSAS.
bulk order?
No, I don't see. See, INSAS was, I will say, sort of an experimental, model by our DRDO. And so it was it's one in a kind of a weapon system. And it has not served us well. I mean, I have no hesitation in saying that. There are a lot of problems with it. And that's the reason why we are going in for a new weapon system. The AK series, is a very mature weapon system. It's been in use, all over the world. And so, in fact, we are also, most of the Rashtra rifles is actually using AK-47 rifles. And we found that absolutely no problem. So what we are getting is, in fact, a more modern variant. So I frankly don't see any problems with the new rifle.
I'm seeing problems with manufacturing in India in bulk quantity.
I don't think so. As long as the processes are put in place and the quality control is there, I don't think. The problem with the AK was not so much quality control. There were also design issues, not with the AK, sorry, with the INSAS.
It was getting
There were
jammed
also
with was
there were also many there were also many design issues, etc. with it. So uh, I'm sure the manufacturer will make sure that the quality is all right. If it is not all right, again, every time you also receive certain systems, it goes through an inspection before it is actually handed out to the troops. So you will have quality control. I don't think we should uh, raise questions and doubts even before the weapon is introduced. Yeah.
So I had a question around how the future challenges look like. So what are some of the challenges that the Indian Army faces at the moment and coming in might face in the future, especially with the growing Sino-Nepal relationship, the construction that China has been doing in Pakistan? So with respect to these situations.
So you identified some of them yourself. The fact is that we have uh, two borders, which I will term as hostile borders. Uh, Both the Pakistan border and the China border are borders where we have adversarial, hostile kind of relationship. We also know that there is a growing sort of nexus between China and Pakistan. They are getting closer together in military cooperation. Most of the systems that Pakistan is now procuring are procured from China. There is also the CPEC, which binds the two countries together strategically and sort of economically. So this is a big challenge as far as the Indian Army is concerned. Also, the fact that these are borders which are very rugged in terrain. Uh, Managing these borders is not very easy. I mean, Siachen is the highest battlefield in the world, and your northern borders with China is along the Himalayan watershed, with the highest mountain range in the world. So this in itself imposes huge challenges of weather, of human endurance, of logistics, that the Indian Army has to go through. Uh, so yes, we have to look at future, China challenge, the future Pakistan challenge, the attempts by China to increase its presence in the Indian Ocean that is happening. The fact that it is attempting to develop closer relationships with countries in South Asia, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, for example. Not too many people know. I think in 2019, Sri Lanka bought almost all its weapons from China. Bangladesh is buying weapons from China. So it's trying to establish closer relationships in South Asia, which is a challenge as far as India is concerned. I think one more future challenge, as far as the Indian military, not only the army, is concerned, is how do you modernize in times of stressed budgets? So the money that the Indian military requires for modernization is not available, and that's to do with some economic realities that India is facing. I mean, obviously, there is also a stressed economic situation in India. We know that our allotment for areas like health education is very, very minimal. So how do you balance national security requirements with uh, requirements of the larger population of India at a time when your budget is and your economic situation is limited? So this, I think, is again a major, major challenge for the Indian military. We have to think about living with lesser amounts of funds, and so what is the direction of modernization that we should take? And this is something that has been occupying, I think, the Indian military planners' minds for a long time. So these are some of the challenges I think we'll face in the future.
Another question would be around CDS. So, how does their command system help the structure and functioning of the army?
So the reason why the CDS was appointed uh, is because there was a need that some priorities and coordination needs to be done between the three services. Now, when you have three services, sort of working independently, a bit in their own stovepipes, everyone sort of competing for a limited budget, everyone saying, my system is of greater priority than the other service system. So that coordination to a certain extent, was missing. And it was decided, I mean, the decision to appoint a CDS was taken after the Kargil war. It was part of the Kargil Review Committee. It's not something new. It's just that previous governments did not take this decision, and this government has. So I think the role of the CDS is important. As I said, in times of stress budgets, you need somebody who will lay down the priorities of what the three services need. Also, future wars, as everyone says, are going to be in a joint war fighting mode. All the services have to pitch together in an integrated manner to fight future wars, with separate headquarters of each of all the three services. That was not happening. So one more mandate of the CDS is to have joint war fighting establishments and headquarters. So we are now hearing of integrated commands where Navy, Air Force, Army will all be together as part of one headquarter. Currently, there are no joint headquarters, that are operating.
Yeah. So a couple of last questions before we end it. So one is probably ending it with the civil-military relations that we have, especially in the region that you serve in Jammu and Kashmir. There's a lot of distrust that has grown over the period of time, especially through probably propaganda that comes from Pakistan, that of the civil-military relationship. And we have seen Rashtriya Rifles recently doing a lot of activities to actually increase the civil and military bonding that has been there. So, going forward, how do you think post appropriation of Article 370s, after that, there was another kind of distrust in their system. So, how do you see the civil military relationship can be expanded from there?
Oh, so you're talking about relations between the military and the civil population?
Yes, sir.
So, see, it's always been part of the Indian Army's doctrine that in some ways the center of gravity of any internal conflict is the civil population. I think we clearly understand that unless you take a majority of the civil population on board, I mean, you are not going to be able to solve these problems like Nagaland and Jammu and Kashmir. you can keep killing terrorists as long as the people are not with you. I mean, you cannot say we are going to win this conflict in Jammu and Kashmir. So the people have to accept that yes, we are a part of the Indian Constitution. Yes, we have a stake in India, that we are willing to do things in a political manner rather than taking to violence and to crime. Uh, so this is something that we've always sort of followed and had. Uh, the bonding has always been there. We run programs like under Operation Sadbhavna is what we call it, where we do medical centers for the local population. We have vocation centers for teaching people. We have youth centers. We organize sports institutions, sports competitions. Uh, so a lot of work. We are running coaching centers for IITs. Uh, we are running, I think, more than 40 schools in Jammu and Kashmir. A lot of places where absolutely free education is provided. So there is a lot of effort towards bonding. Unfortunately, some of it is goes unnoticed because our news channels only talk about, yeah, we have killed 3 terrorists today, we have killed 2 terrorists today. That seems to get everyone very excited. But I think the real victory will lie not in the number of terrorists that you kill, which is essential, of course, but in how you can turn the popular sentiment on your side. So the army is sort of trying to do its best, but I think also it's not something that only the army can do. I think there is political healing that is required. So the government of the day, both at the center and at the state, also needs to reach out to the people, particularly young people like you, some of whom are now sort of picking up the gun, carry out much more extensive youth engagement, and see how we can get the people on our side.
So on a similar note, sir, I've heard this a lot of times that the Indian Army actually makes announcement before actually carrying out an operation. If they find out that a person is carrying out the gun is a Kashmiri, if it's a foreign terrorist, I don't think there's an intervention problem. But if it's a Kashmiri, there's a chance that's been given through announcements. Is that true, sir?
Yeah, it is true. So it is our understanding that it's better to get at least the local people who've joined militancy. It's better if we can get them back into the mainstream, because that also serves as a good example to the other people that yes, he's come back and that he has been rehabilitated. So there is a what we call a surrender and rehabilitation policy in Jammu and Kashmir. And it's now become almost standard practice that when we find that there is a local uh, terrorist who's holed up in some house, that you make an announcement asking him to surrender. There have been numerous cases where his family members have been brought to that area, and they have been asked to appeal to him. In case they cannot be brought there, then on mobile telephones, uh, appeal to him that a lot of these guys are 18, 20, 21, 22 years old. I mean, it's honestly a waste of you know a youth's life. So if we can get them back, that policy is being done, and you will find a lot of senior commanders who are there also saying that uh, we will do anything to rehabilitate people if they willingly surrender and come back to join the mainstream.
So, sir, before letting you go, this is one question we haven't intentionally included in the questionnaire so that we can ask you on the spot. If you have to think of one story that you want to tell our viewers from your days in the army, what would it be?
Oh, I think it would be the story of the surgical strike, frankly, because I think it sort of epitomizes to a very large extent, the kind of challenges that people face. Uh, what professionalism, what training, what good soldiers, can actually do in a situation like this. So, I think that would be one good story. One favorite personal story of mine, and I think Ananya is going to like this. I'll just tell you. 2015, we had a case of a commanding officer, uh, Colonel Mahadek, who, in an operation, and commanding officers are senior people. I mean, 20 years of service, and leading an operation, he died during that operation. And I mean, very, very unfortunate. His wife, name is Swati Mahadek. She was living in Udhampur, uh, in the family accommodation where, I was also posted as an army commander. Our headquarters was located at Udhampur. So when my wife went to meet her and to pay our condolences, she said, I want to join the army. Now, her name is Swati Mahadek, incidentally. Swati was 35 years old. She had two children, one, I think, aged 10 and one aged 8. The last age for entry into Officers Training Academy is 25 years old. She was 10 years older than that. And we said, listen, I think you need to reconsider. I mean, not only the fact that you have two children, which you got to leave behind during the training period, etc., but also, just the physical kind of toll that it takes. And you're 35 years old. She said, no, you take sanctions, you do whatever you want. I want to join the army. So we went to army headquarters. The case went up to the Raksha Mantri, Parikar at that time, and he gave a special sanction for her to join. Outstanding lady. She graduated from Officers Training Academy at the age of 37. By far the eldest person ever to have joined the army. But she was so motivated. I think you should read her story. Swati Mahadek. But to me, I mean, that kind of determination, that kind of challenge, and when somebody says, women officers are physically weak, I think everybody should look at the example of Swati Mahadek. Hats off to that lady.
That really was a great story to hear.
Yeah. She's outstanding. She is, in fact, I think right now posted at Dehradun.
So, sir, thank you so much, sir, for taking your time and being on the show. It's an honor to host you, and I'm pretty much sure the young students will get much inspiration listening to your stories and this interview. And probably some of them might take up, and you might see some of them as some of your colleagues in recent few years.
That would be a great pleasure for me. It would be nice. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you all very much. Great, wonderful interacting with the two of you. Although I thought it would last 30 minutes, not 70. but it's been good fun. Yeah, time flies.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much once again, sir.
Chalo, take care and all the best. All the best in your venture. Do well.